Ready?
Yep.
All right. Hello, my name is Danny Massey, President Maxima Racing Oils. I'm here in New Zealand for the week, educating and talking with dealers and consumers about why Maxima is a bit different in our philosophies in putting together performance oils to help create a better rider experience for everyone. Forbes and Davies is our importer and has invited us down and spent some time on the South Island and here on the North Island, getting acquainted with everybody and the riding cultures here in New Zealand. So one of the questions that we often get asked in two-stroke gearboxes is what is the appropriate oil to use? Some companies manufacture specific gearbox oils like Maxima. We have the MTL line, which is motorcycle transmission lubricant. Other companies just publish their engine oil for use in two-stroke gearboxes. So I think it's a very valid question. As I mentioned, it's one that does get asked quite a bit. When you look at some of the OEM books, you'll see a lot of the Japanese OEMs may spec out a particular viscosity grade that's associated with engine oils, like a 1030 or a 1040 engine oil, whereas a lot of companies that come from America, like Maxima, publish out specific gearbox oils. So the real difference does lie in some of the chemistry. I can say that you can use both without too much fear. I do think a specific gearbox oil can have added value because there is a typical or a particular appetite for additives that gears want, and they are not present in many engine oils that are not designed for motorcycles. So if you look at Maxima's motorcycle range of engine oils, we have a JASO MA2 certification, which is safe for wet clutch, which also has an incorporated gearbox in it. So if you have a motorcycle specific oil that you are using in a gearbox, chances are that is fine because it's going to have some of that additive incorporated in, because any motorcycle engine oil, as you know, has incorporated gearboxes and clutches, whereas a specific transmission or gearbox oil like the Maxima MTL is specifically designed only for the gearbox. So we have the appropriate balance of additive chemistry to protect both the clutch and the gears without having anything additional that is unneeded, like maybe additives that you would use for combustion chamber deposits and such. All right, so speaking specifically about OEM oil recommendations, you'll see a lot of different literature published out there, whether it's a Japanese OEM like Honda or Yamaha Kawasaki, or European specification that might come from KTM. There is some differences in what these OEMs are recommending. So in general terms, I think it's safe to say that globally the most accepted oil viscosity range for typical motorcycles of today is a 1040. On the opposite ends of that spectrum, you do have Honda that recommends some 1030, and you do have KTM, Husqvarna, some of the European brands that recommend a 1050. So what does it really mean to you as a consumer? I think it's always a good idea to follow OEM recommended oil viscosities. They may be in place for a particular reason. My personal experience in what we've been doing is that 1040s generally do work very well in most machines. The machining, the tolerances of the motors are very accepting of lighter weight viscosity oils. However, if you start dropping lower viscosity than what is recommended, you could run into the risk of having an issue that is unforeseen, bearings or something like that. But in racing applications, most teams that we do work with do tend to drop oil viscosity to make more horsepower. And as long as the oil is built to a respected specification for and intended for racing, then you can get away with a very high performance type oil dropping a viscosity range, say from a 1040 to a 530, and still not have any sacrifice to part life and of course make power. So some of the things we talked about over this past week in educating dealers was on the differences of quality of oils. We went into some of the technical aspects of when oils oxidize and start to fall apart, which have detrimental effects to the engine and its performance. A lot of our oils that we manufacture, from whether it's mineral oil all the way through synthetic, really come from a performance angle. So a lot of our petroleum oils are built very strong to withstand the demands placed on it from racing. So one of the questions I had, which I think is very valid over the week, was if I change my oil often, let's say I'm a moto guy and I change it every 3 rides and I maybe have 6 hours on it, do I really need an oil of that quality? And I think if we reflect back on what goes into making a true performance oil or a true motorcycle specific oil, the answer becomes a little more apparent, and the answer is yes, you still do need a performance oil like Maxima, because even if you start with an oil of lesser quality and you don't ride very hard and you service it regularly, from the moment you start the bike up through that 6-hour service interval time, your oil, the chances that it maybe doesn't have the correct additives in it to begin with. So from point, the first minute you ride all the way up to that 6-hour window, you're creating wear and abrasive natures to that engine, and you can cause yourself a problem that would then show up, in 20 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours. So I think it still is important to have a performance oil, even though you have consistent change intervals, because at the end of the day, if the oil doesn't have what you need, it didn't have it from the beginning. So the fact that you're running it for less amount of time doesn't patch or hide the fact that that engine oil or the engine will wear out. So Maxima has 2 really high performing chain lubes. Both sell amazing in the US, #1 and 2 in the marketplace. Also here in New Zealand, very, very popular. So the question comes up, the great chain lube debate: chain wax or chain guard? From my vantage point and my experience with race teams and myself as a user, both can be used in off-road, both can be used as street. It really comes down to personal preference. If we had the split hairs, I can give you a little bit of background on some of the chain lubes, maybe help you determine which may be the appropriate one for you. But as I mentioned, if we had the split hairs, I think the chain guard offers a little bit more freeness to the chain. I think it's a little bit more effective being a synthetic, lightweight chain lube. So the resistance to rolling and such is a little bit better, and we can substantiate that slightly on dynos. On the flip side, chain wax, which is our #1 selling product globally in the chain category, is very hard to beat for any applications that require, say, street use, where you have high amount of kilometers that you're putting on, or you have adverse weather, humidity, moisture, trail crossings, and off-road. The ability for chain wax to stay on the chain is second to none. I think it's the longest lasting chain lube on the market. It's for sure the cleanest lasting chain lube on the market. So again, it's a tough competitor in its own. But again, if I have to split hairs, I generally lend to using chain guard in off-road motocross applications for the freeness of it, and reapplying oil between motos is something that's everyone's pretty much accustomed to doing, whereas chain wax, you want to set out on an adventure for the weekend, you don't want to fuss with the chain. Chain wax is going to do the job for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. All right, so a KX450, my personal bike of choice. I think Pro Plus 1040 is an amazing product to run in that. Also, for something that's a little more performance, you're keeping this bike a long time, but you're still really keyed in on performance and taking care of your equipment. Extra is one that the factory has raised for a long, long time. So Extra 1040 would be a very good choice in that as well. CRF230. So CRF230 general, my understanding of the the CRF230 is a little more entry-level bike. Maybe you don't need all the peak power out of it. Maybe it's not worth spending the money for something exotic as, say, Extra that is triple ester. CRF230 is I'll say an older engine designed for Honda, so it's not the really short piston skirt, so it's not as critical as something, say, a CRF250 that gets wrung out. So I would say it's very acceptable to step down and maybe run something like the semi-synthetic. That's going to give you true value for protecting your equipment, making sure you're having a good day out at the track without any problems, but not coming at the price tag of a true race oil. All right, so YZ250 two-stroke, couple options. Our number one selling product is 927. I think it's amazing. There's no question that from a true lubrication standpoint, that 927 is going to deliver everything you need. Some people are a little bit afraid of Caster. They maybe heard something bad about it in the past. It's dirty, it's gummy. Not really the case with 927 if it's tuned properly. It is a high temperature oil, so you do have to be able to jet the bike, but if you can jet the bike, it's an amazing oil. I've really seen it come apart at 10 hours and kind of scratch my head at what happened, and seen it come apart at 100 hours and still see hone marks in the cylinder. So great product. A little more general use product, but still performance orientated, very user friendly, easy to tune. Step down from 927 would be Super M. It's a semi-synthetic ester based, got about 60% synthetic content, so it's a true performance oil and would be very, very easy to tune because it's a lower temp type oil. And again, in the gearbox there, I would say to run in a 250, I'd run the MTL R, which are racing 80 weight. All right, RM125. So depending on the caliber of rider on that, those bikes have really come into favor with some fast motocross guys doing frame up builds. If that's something you're ringing it out, I worked with Suzuki back in 2000, and they were with another manufacturer at the time in the US that had a massive issue with main bearings. They had switched over to K2. So Formula K2 would be my candidate oil for the engine on an old RM125 for a lot of reasons, but very specifically there was some development done specifically for Suzuki in some of those older two-strokes, and it really made them live. So K2. KTM 500 EXC, I have that bike. Yeah, all right. So KTM 500 EXC, great stable platform, great bike. I would go with Pro Plus 1050. It's a bike I have in my own stable for off-road and Baja rides, single track. Great workhorse bike. Pro Plus 1050 fits the bill, fits all the viscosity specs for that oil. Fully JASO MA certified, so it's very, very good in the clutch and gives a lot of durability and longevity to that between oil drain intervals, which typically see longer drain intervals than you would see on a motocross bike. Yep, so 2009 Honda 450, a little bit finicky of a bike when it comes to clutch performance. That was before they come back to single compartment fills. I would say there's a couple options. I have worked with quite a few Honda riders through Maxima and have a couple different options that you can run. Some choose to just have one oil for both sides. Both the engine and clutch side. Others choose to go an engine oil specific on that side and a gearbox on the other. Myself, I would probably lend to going with an engine oil on the engine side. I think for the 450 Honda, I would probably recommend going with Pro Plus 1040 or even down to a 1030. And then on the gearbox side, you can go in with the MTL R80 as well, unless you're doing some more off-road type riding, and you can opt for the 85, which is our endurance grade on the clutch.
You feel good.
That was enough randomness, I think.